Hello, this video is sort of a continuation series from the finding main ideas. Now this one's going to be about finding a thesis in a text. So I'm going to structure it really similarly, and then I'm going to give you some really specific strategies, and then I'll provide an example working with the same text that I did from the main ideas video. So some strategies for identifying the thesis. Keep in mind that an article only has one thesis, while articles have lots of main ideas, okay? So when we're talking about the thesis, we're trying to find either a statement or come up with a statement that reflects the big picture of the article. So first, always start with that backwards approach. Identify the supporting details, then worry about identifying the main ideas, then you can move towards finding the thesis. First thing that I recommend is when you're trying to figure out the thesis of an article, step back from the article and without looking, so don't look at the text, state just out loud, or you can even jot it down, what you think the big picture point of the article is. So what do I think this article is about? What was the big point that the author was trying to get across in this text? Then what you can do is, you got that idea in your mind, then go back and scan the article, scan the text for any statements that seem close to what your thesis idea was that you just said out loud or that you jotted down. Now, I'd already mentioned, not all articles are going to have a stated thesis. Sometimes it's implied. And so you might not actually find a statement that matches what you were thinking. That doesn't mean you are wrong. It just means you have to think about, okay, well, did this article ever directly state it? Or is this an article that just gave me lots of hints so that as a reader I can figure it out? So that's the first thing. You scan the text. See if there's anything there that kind of matches. Then what you're going to do is look at all those main ideas you found. So not the supporting details, just the main ideas. Whatever the thesis of the article is, it's going to cover all of those main ideas, meaning all those main ideas kind of have to fall under it. If you think of a thesis statement sort of like an umbrella, and then anything under that umbrella, right, it has to fit, it has to go underneath. That's sort of what a thesis does. So if you have a thesis idea in your mind and you're looking through your main ideas and you're like, oh, well, what I had thought, it really only relates to maybe two of my main ideas, well, then that lets you know that that's probably not the full thesis. It might be part of it, but it's not the whole thing yet. Then what you can do is you can ask yourself some questions about the author and the article's intention. So always start with just the title of the article. Title of the article I was looking at before was Take Notes from the Prose, so I could be like, well, what does Laura Papano think about taking notes from the prose? Is she for it? Is she against it? Did she do it herself? I can ask all these questions and it starts to get at, well, what was the author trying to say about this topic? So it's a good strategy for trying to figure out, well, what is the article's big point? Finally, you can also consider how the article is structured. And again, I'll kind of show you this in the example, but when you are thinking about the structure of an article, if I can look at the article and I'm like, wow, well, half of the main points are describing a problem, the other half are describing a solution, so this is kind of a problem and solution setup, then my thesis is, or the article's thesis would also have that problem and solution format. If you have an article and you're like, wow, this whole article is just a list of advice for someone, then you'd be like, okay, well, my thesis probably should reflect that this is advice. And so you can kind of try and figure out something about the thesis by considering, well, what was the structure of this article? What was the purpose? What was the author trying to achieve with how it's structured, how it's written? And so that can give you some nice hints about what the thesis may be. So I'm going to go back to that article, Take Notes from the Prose. So I'd already mentioned this is an implied thesis article. And so what I would do is I'd be like, okay, so do I think Laura Papano, I think she thinks notes are important. I'm a little unsure if she's for or against the online note-taking. I might need to look back at that a little bit. I'm like, what do I think is it that she's trying to get across? And I'm like, if I'm just going to say it out loud again without actually looking through the article, I'm like, I think it's something about notes being important. Right? Because I can remember that it seemed to be like this insistence that notes are helpful for students. So I'm going to go back and then start looking at the main ideas. So there's this note about online marketing is becoming popular. Some professors are for and against it. The demand for notes is there. Research shows that having notes raises test performance, hard to get the details down when you're taking your own notes. Videotaped lectures can help with that. You get more out of taking notes by hand than a laptop. And then not all students are going to share. And I'm like, okay, well, let me think back then. So I thought that the author's point was that notes are important. Like, but how does the idea of like the taking notes yourself or not yourself fit in? I'm like, And so I have to think how I can capture that, right? Because there's obviously something the author's trying to get across. And so if I go back and look, I'm like, well, the author never says that she's all for online note selling. She's also doesn't sound like she's against it, because she's giving some suggestions on how to take notes by hand or myself if I'm a student. I'm like, well, maybe her thesis then is something along the lines of that notes are needed for student success regardless of whether the students take notes by hand or purchase the notes online. And then I could go back and I could compare each main idea, and I'm like, wow, does each main idea fit under that? The idea that there's this online market, that fits under that because it's addressed, right? That it doesn't matter how students get the notes online or otherwise. The problems with student taking note themselves, right? It's hard to get things down. And I'm like, wow, you know what? That covers it. And so I can do that check and see if all my main ideas come under that. But I had to come up with the wording and phrasing on my own. And so finding the thesis, again, not all thesis statements are implied, some are, but just be prepared for that sometimes you do have to say it yourself. Again, these are strategies that will be helpful. There's also some strategies, of course, for finding the thesis main ideas and supporting details listed on the handout that I gave out last week. But any questions, of course, let me know. And again, you'll be able to share your ideas for when you found the thesis on things like discussion boards, so that you're able to kind of check and see if you think you're getting the right bigger picture idea or not. So again, any questions, let me know. Hope this helps.